In this video, we'll explore who Marcus Aurelius was, why his writings are significant, and the core philosophy of Stoicism that he embraced. First, let's get to know the man behind the book. Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor who ruled from 161 to 180 AD. He was part of the Five Good Emperors of Rome and is often regarded as one of the wisest rulers in history. Born in 121 AD, Marcus Aurelius faced numerous challenges during his reign, including wars, plagues, and political turmoil. However, it's his personal journey as a philosopher that makes him truly remarkable. Now, why is Meditations so significant? This collection of personal writings, composed during his military campaigns, is essentially a window into his inner world. Meditations is unique because it wasn't written for public consumption. Instead, it's a private diary of his thoughts, reflections, and philosophical musings. It's like having a conversation with one of the greatest minds of antiquity. To truly appreciate Meditations, we need to understand the philosophy that guided Marcus Aurelius, Stoicism. Stoicism is a philosophy that emphasizes rationality, virtue, and self-control. It teaches us to focus on what we can control in life and accept what we can't. Marcus Aurelius embraced Stoicism as his guiding philosophy, and it's evident throughout Meditations. Now, let's explore some of the key Stoic principles found in Meditations. First, there's the concept of amor fati, or love of fate. Marcus encourages us to accept whatever happens in life as if we had chosen it, finding purpose even in adversity. Another central idea is self-discipline. He reminds us that we have control over our reactions and emotions, and by practicing self-discipline, we can find tranquility even in turbulent times.
So today we're going to be looking at Book 1. These are the Emperor Marcus Aurelius Antonius, his meditations or his discourses with himself. The example of my grandfather Varus gave me a good disposition, not prone to anger. By the recollection of my father's character, I learned to be both modest and manly. As for my mother, she taught me to have regard for religion, to be generous and open-handed, and not only to forbear from doing anybody any ill turn, but not so much as to endure the thought of it. By her, likewise, I was bred to a plain, inexpensive way of living, very different from the common luxury of the rich. I have to thank my great-grandfather that I did not go to a public school, but had good masters at home, and learnt to know that one ought to spend liberally on such things. From my governor, I learned not to join either the green or the blue faction on the race ground, nor support the Harmolarius or the Scultarius at the gladiator shows. He taught me also to put my own hand to business upon occasion, to endure hardship and fatigues, and to throw the necessities of nature into a little compass, that I ought not to meddle with other people's business, nor be easy in giving credit to informers. From the Diognetus, to shun vain pursuits, not to be led away with the impostors of wizards and soothsayers who pretend they can discharge evil spirits and do strange feats by the strength of a charm, not to keep quails for the pit, nor to be eager after any such thing. This Diognetus taught me to bear freedom in plain dealing in others, and apply myself to philosophy. He also procured me the instruction of Bacchius, Tandaeus, and Marcianus. He likewise put me upon improving myself by writing dialogues when I was a boy, prevailed with me to prefer a couch covered with hides to a bed of state, and reconciled me to other like rigors of the Grecian discipline. It was Rusticus that first made me desire to live rightly and come to a better state, who prevented me from running into the vanity of the sophists, either by writing speculative treatises, haranguing upon moral subjects, or making a fantastical appearance or display of generosity or discipline. This philosopher kept me from yielding to the charms of rhetoric and poetry, from affecting the character of a man of pleasantry, from wearing my senator's robes in the house, or anything of this kind, which looks like conceit and affectation. He taught me to write letters in a plain, unornamental style, like that dated by him from Sinuessa to my mother. By his instructions, I was persuaded to be easily reconciled to those who had misbehaved themselves and disobliged me, as soon as they desired reconciliation. And of not the same master, I learned to read an author carefully, not to take up with superficial view, or assent quickly to idle talkers. And to conclude with him, he gave me his own copy of Epictetus' Memoirs. Apollonius taught me to give my mind its due freedom and disengage it from dependence upon chance, and not to regard, though ever so little, anything uncountenanced by reason, to maintain an equality of temper, even in acute pains and loss of children or tedious sickness. His practice was an excellent instance that a man may be forcible and yet unbend his humor as occasion requires. The heaviness and impertinence of his scholars could seldom rouse his ill temper. As for his learning and the peculiar happiness of his manner in teaching, he was so far from being proud of himself upon this score, that one might easily perceive he thought it one of the least things which belonged to him. This great man let me into the true secret of receiving an obligation, without either lessening myself or seeming ungrateful to my friend. The philosopher Sextus recommended good humor to me, and showed me the pattern of a household governed in a fatherly manner. He also bade me make nature and reason my rule to live by. By his precedent, I was instructed to appear with an unaffected gravity, to study the temper and circumstances of my friends in order to oblige them. I saw him bearing with the ignorant and undiscerning, complacent and obliging to all people, so that his conversation was more charming than flattery, and yet at the same time he was held in the highest reverence by others. Conversing with this philosopher helped me to draw up a true, intelligible, and methodical scheme for life and manners, and never so much as to show the least sign of anger or any other disturbing thought, but to be perfectly calm and indifferent, and yet tender-hearted. However, he let me see in himself that a man might show his goodwill significantly enough without noise and display, and likewise possess great knowledge without vanity and ostentation. Alexander the grammarian taught me not to be ruggedly critical about words, nor find fault with people for improprieties of phrase or pronunciation, but to set them right by speaking the thing properly myself, and that either by my way of answer, assent, or inquiry, or by some other indirect and suitable correction. Fronto taught me that envy, tricking, and dissimulation are the character and consequences of tyranny, and that those we call patricians have commonly not much fatherly feeling in them. Alexander the Platonist advised me that without necessity I should say to anyone nor write in a letter that I am not at leisure, nor make business an excuse to decline frequently with the offices of humanity to those we dwell with. I learned of Catullus not to slight a friend for making a remonstrance, though it should happen to be unreasonable, but rather to endeavor to restore him to his natural humor, that like Domitus and Athenodotus, I should always speak well of those who had the care of my education, and that I should always preserve a heartly affection for my children. I am indebted to Severus for the love I bear to my relations and towards justice and truth. He likewise made me acquainted with the character and sentiments of Cato Brutus, Graecia, Helvidius, and Dio, and gave me the idea of an equal commonwealth with equal rights and equal speech, and also of a monarchy where the liberty of the subject was principally regarded. To mention some more of my obligations to him, it was him I learned not to grow wise by starts and sudden fancies, but to be a constant admirer of philosophy and improvement, that a man ought to be generous and obliging, hope the best of matters, and never question the affection of his friends, to be free in showing a reasonable dislike of another, and no less clear in his own expectations and desires, and not to put his friends to the trouble of divining what he would be at. I learned from Maximus to command myself, and not to be too much drawn towards anything, to be full of spirits under sickness and misfortune, to appear with modesty, obligingness, and dignity of behavior, to turn off business smoothly as it arises without grudging and complaint. Whatever he did, all men believed him, that as he spoke, so he thought, and whatever he did, that he did with a good intent. He attained that greatness of mind, not to wonder or start at anything, neither to hurry an enterprise, nor sleep over it, never to be puzzled or dejected, nor to put on an appearance of friendliness, not to be angry or suspicious, but ever ready to do good and to forgive and speak truth. And all this is one who seemed rather of himself to be straight and right than ever to have been rectified. Nobody ever could fancy they were slighted by him, or dared to think themselves his betters. Besides all this, he had an agreeable wit. In my adopted father, I observed a smooth and inoffensive temper, with great steadiness in keeping close to measures judiciously taken, a greatness proof against vanity and the impressions of pomp and power. From him a prince might learn to love business and action, and be constantly at it, to be willing to hear out any proposal relating to public advantage, and undeviatingly give every man his due, to understand the critical seasons and circumstances for rigor and remissness, to have no boy favorites, not to stand upon points of state and prerogative, but to leave his nobility at perfect liberty in their visits and attendance. And when he was upon his progress, no man lost his favor for not being at leisure to follow the court, to debate matters nicely and thoroughly at the council board, and then to stand by what was resolved on, yet not hastily to give up the inquiry, as one easily satisfied with sudden notions and apprehensions, to be constant to a friend without tiring or fondness, to be always satisfied and cheerful, to reach forward into the future and manage accordingly, not to neglect the least concerns, but all without hurry or being embarrassed. Farther, by observing his methods and administration, I had the opportunity of learning how much it was the part of a prince to check the excesses in panegyric and flattery, to have his magazines and eschallar well furnished, to be frugal in his expenses without minding being lampooned for his pains, not to worship the gods to superstition, not to court the populace either by prodigality or compliment, but rather to be sober and firm upon all occasions, keeping things in a steady decorum without chopping and changing of measures, to enjoy the plenty and magnificence of a sovereign fortune without bragging, and yet without making excuse, so as freely to enjoy them when present, but when wanting, not to be mortified at the loss of them, and to behave himself so that no man could charge him with sophisticy or buffooning or being a pedant. No, he was a person mature and perfect, scorning flattery, and thoroughly qualified to govern himself and others. As for those that were philosophers in earnest, he had a great regard for them, but without reproaching those who were otherwise, nor yet being led away by these. He was condescending and familiar, in conversation, and pleasant too, but not too tiresome or excess. As for his health, he was not anxious about it like one fond of living, or over-studious of bodily appearance, and yet managed his constitution with that care as seldom to stand in need of the assistance of a physic or outward applications. Further, he never envied or browbeat those that were eminent in any faculty or science as eloquence or knowledge of the laws or morals, but on the contrary, encouraged them in their ways and promoted their reputation. He observed fitness and custom in all his actions, and yet did not seem to regard them. He was not fickle and fluttering in his humor, but constant both to place and undertaking, and I have seen him, after violent fits of the headache, return fresh and vigorous to his usual business. He kept but few things to himself, and those were secrets of government. He was very moderate and frugal in shows, public buildings, liberalities, and such like, being one that did not so much regard the popularity as the rightness of an action. It was none of his custom to bathe at unusual hours, or to be overcome with the fancy of building, to study eating and luxury, to value the curiosity of his clothes, or the shape and person of his servants. His cloak came from the Lorium, his villa on the coast. At Lanuvium he wore for the most part only a tunic, and at Tusculum he would scarcely so much as put on a cloak without making an excuse for it. To take him altogether, there was nothing of ruggedness, immodesty, or eagerness in his temper. Neither did he ever seem to drudge and sweat at the helm. Things were dispatched at leisure and without being felt, and yet the administration was carried on without confusion, with great order, force, and uniformity. Upon the whole, what was told of Socrates is applicable to him, for he was so much master of himself that he could either take or leave those conveniences of life with respect to which most people are either uneasy without them or intemperate with them. Now to hold on with fortitude in one condition and sobriety, and the other is a proof of a great soul and an impregnable virtue, such as he showed in the sickness of Maximus. I have to thank the gods that my grandfather's parents, sister, preceptors, relations, friends, and domestics were almost all of them persons of probity, and that I never happened to disoblige or misbehave myself towards any of them, notwithstanding that my disposition is such that had occasion offered I might have acted thus. But by the goodness of the gods I met with no provocations to reveal my infirmities. It is likewise by their providence that my childhood was no longer managed by my grandfather's mistress, that I had preserved the flower of my youth, that I was subject to the emperor my father, and bred under him, who was the most proper person living, to put out of conceit with pride, and to convince me that it is possible to live in a palace without the ceremony of guards, without richness and distinction of habit, without torches, statues, or such other marks of royalty and state, and that a prince may shrink himself almost into the figure of a private gentleman, and yet act nevertheless with all the force and majesty of his character when the commonwealth requires it. It is the favor of the gods that I happen to meet with a brother whose behavior and affection is such as to contribute both to my pleasure and my improvement. It is also a blessing that my children were neither stupid nor misshapen, that I made no farther advances in rhetoric, poetry, and such other amusements, which possibly may have engaged my fancy too far. Had I found myself considerable Protestant, that without asking I gave my governors that share of honor which they seemed to desire, and did not put them off from time to time with promises and excuses, because they were yet but young. That I had the happiness of being acquainted with Apollonius, Rusticus, and Maximus, that I have a clear idea of the life in accordance with nature, and the impression frequently refreshed. so that, considering the extraordinary assistance and direction of the gods, it is impossible for me to miss the road of nature unless by refusing to be guided by the dictates and almost sensible inspirations of heaven. It is by their favor that my constitution has held out so well under a life of fatigue and business, that I never had to do with Benedictica or Theodotus, and when I fell into some fits of love, I was soon cured, that when I fell out with Rusticus, as it frequently happened, I was not transported into acts of violence, that I had the satisfaction of my mother's life and company a considerable while, though she was destined to die young, that when I was willing to relive the necessities of others, I was never told that the escriture was empty, and yet again, it is that they kept me from standing in need of any man's fortune. Farther, it is from them that my wife is so very obedient and affectionate, and so remote from luxury, that I had choice of good governors for my children, that remedies were prescribed me, and a dream against giddiness, and a spitting of blood, as at Cajeta by an ointment, that when I had a mind to look into philosophy, I did not meet with a sophist to instruct me, that I did not spend too much of my time reading history, chopping logic, or considering the heavens. Now all these points could never have been compassed without the protection from above, and the gods presiding over fate. This was written in the country of Quaiti at Granua.
In conclusion, Marcus Aurelius and his Meditations offer us a profound glimpse into the mind of a wise and compassionate leader. His Stoic philosophy continues to inspire countless individuals seeking wisdom and serenity in a chaotic world. We will continue to dive into Meditations and discover the timeless insights it holds. It's a treasure trove of wisdom that can guide us in our own lives, just as it did for Marcus Aurelius.
Book 1 of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations is essentially a collection of his personal reflections and philosophical thoughts. In this book, he explores several key ideas that also align with yoga philosophy. 1. Stoicism and self-reflection. So, Marcus Aurelius emphasizes the importance of self-awareness and self-reflection. He encourages readers to examine their thoughts, actions, and emotions critically. This practice aligns with yoga philosophy, which also promotes self-awareness and introspection as a means to attain inner peace. 2. Acceptance of the present moment. The Stoic concept of accepting the present moment, no matter how challenging or uncomfortable, resonates with the yoga principle of living in the present known as mindfulness. Both philosophies stress the importance of embracing the now and letting go of attachments to past regrets or future anxieties. 3. Control over the mind. Marcus Aurelius discusses the idea that we have control over our thoughts and reactions. This aligns with yoga's emphasis on mental discipline and control. Yogic practices such as meditation and breath control aim to calm the mind and gain mastery over one's thoughts and emotions. 4. Detachment from materialism. The Stoic philosophy encourages detachment from material possessions and external circumstances. Similarly, yoga philosophy promotes detachment from worldly desires and a focus on inner contentment and spiritual growth. 5. Unity and interconnectedness. While not explicitly stated in Book 1, Marcus Aurelius' Stoic worldview acknowledges the interconnectedness of all things. This concept aligns with yoga's emphasis on interconnectedness of all living beings and the idea of finding unity within the universe. So, in summary, Book 1 of Marcus Aurelius' Meditation shares several philosophical ideas with yoga, including self-awareness, mindfulness, mental discipline, detachment from materialism, and recognition of the interconnectedness of life. Both philosophies seek to guide individuals toward inner peace and wisdom through self-examination and ethical living. So there you have it, is book 1. Let me know what you guys think. If you guys have any other insights or where we can align these things with other philosophies or teachings from different people. If you could share those things in the comments below, that would be awesome. And if you like this, go ahead and subscribe so you can follow along for more content like this. Thanks and have a good day, guys.